And we are live.
Hey everybody, welcome to an AVFM radio special. I will be your host this afternoon, or this evening, or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. You may know me as the host of Tales from the Infrared. However, this time we're not talking about fiction. I want to introduce our guest today. His name is William Coleman. Hello, William. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Christian. Hi, James. Yep, my name's Bill Coleman, and thank you very much for having me on the show.
Now, today we're going to be discussing, today I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Coleman about a serious issue. And what we have today is actually a real-world example of what Canadian attorneys and, prosecutors call the silver bullet tactic. It's become a pretty well-known and accepted term for what happens inside a family court. So I'm going to start off by asking you, Bill, why don't you start off at the beginning and take us through, what led to you, first of all, you going to prison, what led to you going on your 7-year hunger strike, which even, I know you told me about it last week, and it still blows my mind that you went on a 7-year hunger strike. So why don't you start at the beginning, take us through that, and we're all interested to hear your story.
Well, I appreciate that, and it can be long, but hopefully it flows. Basically, there was a catalyst. Everything begins with a catalyst, and my catalyst began on Christmas Day at 7 p.m. 1998, when we found out that my wife's father was dying. Unfortunately, we were not told the truth. He'd already died, and they just wanted my wife to go home. What transpired from that was a series of bad choices and bad decisions. On my ex-wife's end, it was a matter of going out and getting drunk every night. Everybody grieves differently, and I profusely apologized in every venue I can even think of for that. But she, as I say, was getting drunk every night, and we had a sick baby at home. We had 2 children, very small. 6 months old and 1.5 years old, and I eventually said, well, and this is before her father had been buried. Subsequently, we found out he was already dead. That if she didn't come home, then because we were in the United States. Home is the UK, where we both lived, and come back to the United States is what I was asking her to do. And unfortunately, that was a bad decision, and it began a feud. And her father hadn't been buried at that time. There was a lengthy process with an autopsy, and so she came back. And then shortly thereafter, when I was away on a business trip, it was early January, she abducted the children, and she took them to the United Kingdom, to Liverpool. And it took me basically, with some kinks here or there, with the Hague Convention, it took me a year to get them back. And at that point, if you want me to, unless you have another question, Christian, basically at that point, I'd gone and received residential custody of my kids. So, and she was literally a hair on your head away from being arrested, both in the UK and possibly even in the US. So I was awarded custody, and that really was the catalyst. Would you like me to continue from there, Christian?
Oh, yes, please. Keep going.
Please interject any time. At that point, I guess the next thing that happened was that I believed, like most most people, I would like to say, in this sense, who have got pretty much unconditional love for their spouse, that you were working it out, and I thought I was working it out. And I did relocate to Newport, Rhode Island, in a way of giving myself some space and time, but I did not take the children, even though I had custody. And the children and my ex-wife came every single weekend to visit me, and that went on for about 2 years, until a point where she started to say that she was working extra work. I had a company where she had a pretty high-level job, and unbeknownst to me, she had met somebody through a friend of his who ironically was having an affair on her fiance. She began this affair. And on one occasion, when I came to the family home, I found that the house, pretty much in disarray, and there was sheets had been ripped off the bed and all those kinds of things. And it was from that visit that she started to say things like, "I don't know how I feel about you anymore." And at that point, it's when I was able to get from her that she'd met somebody and she was having an affair. And that would have been the summer of 2002. And so I permanently moved back into the house. And I was in the house approximately 3 months, maybe a little more than 3 months, before the plan, as as I refer to it as, her plan, then took place and everything else flowed.
Okay, well, how did the rape allegation come about? When did that happen?
Well, it's actually in a twofold spot. Initially, when she abducted the children, she initially tried to make those some. I don't even know whether it was a rape allegation. Then it was some sort of abusive allegation. But what she failed to do the first time was to go to a police department, and I have, in thinking about it, why, subsequently in hindsight, why didn't she go to the police at that time? So this would have been back in 2000. I'm sorry, back in January of '99. And I suspect that they didn't have, and she didn't have the wherewithal that she could get away with it. She didn't feel as though she had. I guess she must have felt she may have gotten caught out or something. I just don't know. But that's what I speculate it was. And the second time, basically what had happened was the weekend before my arrest, she said she was going out to a work-related situation, and she would be back later that day. And then it went silent. Never heard from her. And out overnight. And it was at that point I realized that she had continued her affair. Not right away. It wasn't until I spoke to her the following morning, but and I'd even filed a missing persons report because I thought something happened to her. So, at that point, she gets back. Her car had broken down on the way home. She gets a tow back. And I basically on that Sunday said to her that, we should get a divorce. And she begged me not to. And after going backwards and forwards, I asked that, I have full custody. And I said, with a view for that to change back. And, I certainly didn't want to, I was trying to keep my family together, not break it apart. And I certainly had blame in the demise of my marriage. None of it abusive, but, I certainly had blame. And I wanted to take some of that blame, and I forgave her for the affair. So at that point, she agreed, and I filed for sole custody on the Monday. And just to quickly kind of skip ahead, by that Friday, I was under handcuffs and arrested, and that's where everything else then took place. What I didn't know about that middle week is what she was setting up. And this is why I think on many levels it's so important to communicate my story on, you know, how easily this is done, and the myth that, you know, it's a problem for somebody to report a sexual assault or a sexual abuse, and that, you know, these crimes aren't prosecuted, or people get away with it, or those. That is just so completely fake. Not just because of my experience, but what I've also subsequently seen, both in and out of prison. So basically, what she did was she called the police. I believe the first time, according to the court records, a couple of court records, one was my arraignment on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. And by the way, I'm actually convicted of raping her on the Wednesday night, Thursday morning at 1 a.m. And that's important to know, because she called the police on the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and the divorce lawyer. So either she's clairvoyant that she was going to be raped a day or so later, or obviously it didn't happen, and she was trying to find out what she needed to do. And
so wait, you're telling me, are you saying she had called the cops a day or two prior to the supposed or the alleged act happening?
Yes.
That's red flag number one for me.
Right. Well, that's in the arraignment transcript. And a lot of people like yourself will say red flag, and as I go through the story, there's a lot of red flags. But when you end up with certain stars aligning, and we'll get into my prosecutor and my attorney, the prosecutor, I have no problems in naming Prosecutor John Connolly from Waterbury, who's now, and I hate to say this in such a way because I don't like saying things like that, but it's better off that he's not on this planet anymore. And my now disbarred attorney for similar kind of corruption issues. When that lines up with those kinds of people, that this kind of information is going to be overlooked. And that's how easy this is. Everybody involved in the case knew I was innocent. And as I say, I'll get into a little bit more of that momentarily, because what she had lined up during that week was a lawyer, was talking to the police, finding out what she needed to do. What with was that I wouldn't let her use her car, and I produced Walmart receipts to show that I'd gone in and out of Walmart buying parts for the car all the way through to the Wednesday afternoon, and I eventually had it fixed on the Thursday. And then she said I didn't allow her to go to work on the Monday, and even at my criminal trial, the only thing that came out in that criminal trial, because I had a one-day trial and no witnesses, no case brought up, nothing. It basically was the fact that her timesheet proved she did go to work on that Monday, but I was supposedly I didn't allow her to. I don't know how you would stop somebody from doing that, but apparently that was the story. And then there was a number of other things, and which I'll explain came out in the family trial, which effectively should have been my criminal trial. That of a perjury nature, that she had set up and said just to have me arrested, and everything in that arrest was completely refuted during the family trial. So whether it was the car, whether it was the I didn't allow her to go to work and all this other crazy stuff, it was completely refuted and found as fact by a female judge in a 2-week family trial in Connecticut. Then there was a lady investigator, and for the family court, the only person who's ever investigated the case, and she, my ex-wife, had reported to her that it had happened on the Sunday, this rape, the sexual assault, and then it got changed to a different day, and then it got changed to a different day, and eventually the court investigator lady said at the family trial, she said the last representation, and she was talking to my wife's attorney, your client made to me was that she was raped on Thursday night, Friday morning at 1 a.m. So that is 1 day later than the rape that I'm supposedly have done the day before on the Wednesday night, Thursday morning. And it's also 2-3 days later than when she initially called the police and hired her attorney. She hired the attorney officially, according to documents, on the Tuesday. Because it was all about custody. It was all about getting custody. If I divorced her, she would not have gotten custody, apparently, or she would have got followed through with that. She wouldn't have got custody. So how can she do it? She files for divorce. She would then argue the rape and get custody.
Now, at that time,
Yep.
and I'm sorry for interjecting, but I just want to ask, at this point in time, at that time, were you willing to do a joint custody agreement with?
Once it went to this level, because I'd already been arrested. I mean, prior to me being arrested on the Friday, my understanding was we had a court date in the middle of the month where sole custody would have been given to me. So up until, the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, and the Thursday, while my ex-wife was planning all of this, I was oblivious. I knew nothing. In fact, on that Friday when I was arrested, I wasn't even told I was arrested. I was arrested for some other stuff. I wasn't arrested. I had no idea. I think I found out about it a week later.
Were you even though in your mind you were going to get sole custody, were you willing to say to the family court judge, hey, she's not a bad mother, I would like joint custody so that she can have access to the children as well? Were you willing to do that, or?
No, well, here's what I would have said along those lines. It's, as it turns out, I don't think the family court counselor believed she was a good mother in any way, shape, way, or form. And I was the nurturing parent. I was the emotional parent that was connected in that way to them. So, and I was the one who did stuff with them. I'm really still at a loss to figure out what exactly Jill ever did with my ex-wife ever did with the kids. The joke between our friends was I even breastfed our children because she was propped up in bed asleep while I would move them from one side to the other while they were being breastfed. But I would have said to the judge, this is what I would have said to the judge, that at some point I would be looking to go to joint custody just for the strength of our marriage and to stay together, because that's a promise. I said to my ex-wife, look, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't trust you. What you could do something crazy next. I need to protect me and the children. And but at some point, we'll go back to joint custody. But don't forget, initially I'd said we should get a divorce. But she instantly knew I would have custody of the children because I already had custody. So that's possibly in her head why she was saying, no, please, I beg you, don't divorce me, or don't divorce me, don't ever leave me, I had all of that. What she was going to do about it, I have no idea. Maybe she just thought at the time she was buying time. I really don't know. I would, in a way, would love to find out, but, in another way, who cares? I mean, she did what she did. So I would have said something to the judge, or my feeling is I certainly was in the realms of something I would have said, but not because she was a good mother, more because the children needed both parents. I think that's where the children generally, usually function at their best, is when they have two involved parents that they identify with. So I guess I would have, I was open to, I wasn't being very, I'm not very, militant or like this, like that. I had empathy for that situation completely.
Okay. And you started mentioning something about the prosecutor and your attorney. What happened there? Because you mentioned something about you're happy to see that the prosecutor is no longer in this world, and then you mentioned that you're
I think it's best for this world he's not here. He
Okay.
has quite a bad reputation.
So what
Basically, what
happened?
happened? Yeah, basically, what happened was in the interim, I was out on bond for about 2.5, 3 years, and I sat polygraphs. I went to I did a psych and sexual test with somebody by the name of Dr. Joseph Claude, who's from all accounts and from what I fully believe, he's the world authority in sexual deviancy, and he was featured by Diane Sawyer on her primetime show. So this guy is big time, and me and my family spent, a lot of money, doing all these tests, and trying to prove, that I was innocent. I passed everything, flying colors. The psych and sexual testing, besides months of phone interviews and then a 10-hour interview on the day, and then you end up with virtual reality goggles, a headset, your genitals and your body are strapped up to computers. You're in a hospital gown, hospital setting, basically, his office. You see these horrible images of every form of sexual thing you can possibly imagine. Just horrific, quite frankly. And I passed where I'm only interested in, having a sexual encounter with consenting female adults. So, all of that seemingly was going well. Past the polygraph, the #1 polygraph, the guy is the president of the Tri-State Area Polygraph Association. He's the president of the association. This guy is the #1 guy, and the one that the state police go to all the time. And I passed with flying colors. He in fact said at one point that I don't lie well, because you have to lie for the test at one point. And he showed me on the graph that I spiked off the chart. So how this all goes to the prosecutor is this. My attorney at the time, by the name of Michael Gannon, out of Waterbury, Connecticut, was known as the drug lawyer king of Waterbury. That meant he got special deals, or the best deals, for drug cases. I didn't know that at the time of getting hold of him. And there ended up being a case brought to my attention for a so-called drug lord. And apparently he had given my attorney $70,000 to get him off a case that he'd been offered 35 years as a bid, as a prison bid. The guy ended up doing 18 months, which is unconscionable considering the part of the crime he was arrested for was taking a police officer to within an inch of his life, apparently. Pummeled some police officer, beaten literally half to death. So he gets off with 18 months, and it's known in the trade, you can be railroaded at trial, but that's called being sold out. So I was basically being sold out for another case, and because I was the hotbed topic, and a hotbed topic is domestic violence, sexual assault, home invasion. Those are real buzzwords, or were at that time, and I still believe they are today. And so they knew politically they could do what they want with me, because there'd be no advocates. All the advocates were on, the alleged victim side. Well, and they don't even say alleged victim; they just say victim. There's no alleged. Your arrest in any of these matters is your conviction. Period. There is no due process. There's dotting I's and crossing T's. That's the due process. But there's no due process in terms of safety net to make sure that the facts of the case are laid before the court. That just doesn't happen. That's a myth. So you're railroaded along into this. So, basically what happened, from that piece, the prosecutors had everything they needed to convict me, and all they wanted to do was, get. So the one thing I don't know is how much money was given from my attorney to the prosecutor, but I do know money did change hands. And the reason that's important is because from 2007, 2 years after I was convicted, I actually had called the FBI and wanted them to open an investigation about John Connolly because I was aware of this information, and they didn't. It was a case in 2010 where they were forced to open a case about him, where he'd taken money from another attorney on another case, and it was only then I was able to get more on board with that investigation. So Connolly apparently eventually resigned, citing medical issues. But it wasn't until a year later or so that he was diagnosed with cancer, I believe. And it was then a year after that he passed away. But this guy has got a long, long history of very shady dealings. The FBI eventually said to me, well, now that he's dead, we don't investigate and prosecute dead people. And from the inside, I was told, if they taken me on as a client against him, would have exonerated me, but it would have blown up every case that Connolly had ever prosecuted, and he was the head prosecutor. That every case he'd ever prosecuted, it would have opened a can of worms up in the town of Waterbury, and that's already known as a very dark, shady town, like the worst. It's once been called the armpit of the United States. I mean, it's really bad, and it's sad because it's got a great blue-collar history. You know, it is. It's sad. It's a working-class blue-collar history. It's now very corrupt, and it has been for a long time. So that's how the prosecutor and the lawyer were in the right place and the right time for her, wrong place, wrong time for me. And the information that I was supplying was just going, no, my attorney wasn't doing anything. And that was confirmed by the family court relations lady who saw my file in his office. And it was confirmed really in the week of my trial when he was preparing for it in a bar. in a restaurant, in a bar, and there was no investigation that he'd ever did. He'd done nothing, and now I know it's because I was sold out. And in that week, I think my family gave him, I can't remember the amount, but it was thousands of dollars. I mean, I don't know if it was $5,000 more, maybe $6,000. I'm not even sure. So you know, that's how that piece kind of clicked in. There were some other pieces to do with people who committed perjury for my ex-wife, and I'm sure you remember that, Christian. And it's got to do with some of her friends at a place of work. Would you like me to expand upon that?
Yes, but.
Or do you have a question?
No, you can expand on that, but I'm just going to request that the individuals. Other than your ex-wife, the individuals who are really innocent in all of this, they were just
right.
Okay, just redact their names or don't use their real names.
Right.
But
no,
please go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to use. In a way, I think if my case gets overturned, I think they may be liable for criminal prosecution, and obviously I want to clear my name one day. But I'm not at the stage of my life where I'm at right now, where I'm like full force doing that. It's always on the back burner, and I'll keep doing that for the rest of my life. But at the moment, you know, it's not in the afore. Unfortunately, I think a lot of innocent people lied for her. And knowingly lied for her, not knowingly lied. I think there was one witness she brought on who didn't know or didn't realize she was lying for her. And that person will never be involved in any criminal prosecution. But the others who knowingly did lie for her, I think may have something to worry about. But for now, it wouldn't be appropriate to mention their names. Myself and my ex-wife had sexual relationships with other women, never with men, thank you. Just with other women. And you know, we had one particular relationship that had gone on for about 2 years. and that's on another separate issue that's not directly involved with my criminal case. But there were two that kind of were, both of them from my ex-wife's workplace. And the family court relations lady becomes very critical in this. During my criminal trial, she was actually waiting outside with a box of evidence, and her testimony was going to be, Jillian presents well and is an accomplished liar, because she's very laid back, very sweet, very this, very that, and you always get the sense you want to look after her. And even the family court relations lady said you just want to take care of it. So that's how the family court relations lady began to understand that she was being lied to herself, because no two things were ever the same every single time she spoke to her, whether it was the rapes or anything else. So anyway, with regards to these two girls, both in their early 20s, one of them and the family court relations lady had interviewed both of them at length. Eventually said to my ex-wife during interviews, had you had a sexual relationship, let's say with girl A, and eventually my ex-wife admitted, and not only admitted once but several times, that we had had a sexual relationship with girl A. She denied girl B, and when the family court relations lady interviewed girl B, when that question came up, it was instantly, according to the family relations lady, understandable to her that she was being lied to, because it was like a morgue-like silence and a very uncomfortable feel and a reluctant no. It was very uncomfortable, she said. She was lying. And I tried to make her feel as comfortable as possible to tell the truth. Unfortunately, both of these girls went on the family court trial stand, which was 10 months before my criminal trial, and said under oath that they did not have a sexual relationship with me, I didn't have a sexual relationship with my ex-wife, and didn't have a sexual relationship between the three of us. And the family court relations lady went on the stand and indicated to the court that she believed girl B had lied, but that my ex-wife had said that this relationship had taken place and mentioned to her several times. So at that point, both my ex-wife, who had been on the stand under oath, and this girl A, who was on the stand under oath, had both said this sexual relationship hadn't taken place, and yet my ex had already admitted to it that it had. So that is, right there and then, some of the people, and these are women included, out of some of them in the Connecticut legislature, who read this piece of this part of it, absolutely were infuriated with the judge. And I have no problems in saying who that judge was, who, by the way, gave me a great 2-week trial, absolutely horrible to me in the orders. I got nothing. Let me get everything out. But where she was horrible inside of that 2-week trial was the fact that she didn't instantly stop proceedings and have my ex-wife arrested. There were 5 counts of perjury. I didn't let her use the car. I produced the Walmart receipts. The court found as fact that the car was not operational. That's perjury. I didn't allow her to go to work. Time card, she went to work. The lie about the sexual relationship with girl A. And there were other things that it was just carte blanche. Perjury, it was a done deal. It was a wrap. And at that moment, my ex-wife should have been arrested from a bench warrant, and she wasn't. And I had clearly proven that she lied. So, you know, as I say, as far as I'm concerned, all these things were lining up for my ex-wife. And, you know, I can't explain the how it would have happened, but it just did. Whether it was, you know, the information, the right town, the right prosecutors, the right police force, the right judge, the right this, right that, and here we are where I've got these, you know, hideous charges, and I'm getting railroaded into a conviction.
And so I just want to confirm, has any charges of perjury ever been levied against your ex or any of the other women who have committed perjury during the case?
None, because I got convicted. Here's another perjury piece. I already mentioned that the police and the divorce attorney were contacted before the actual event. When my ex-wife had broken down in a car and got towed, she was in a parking lot close to her workplace, and Girl B showed up with his sister because initially Girl B was going to drive my ex-wife home, but I came with the kids because I had the kids. I actually was able to get there and picked her up. This sister, who actually had been dating more than one police officer in the Cheshire Police Department, decides upon herself, oh, this is you know, a different, you know, situation, and so she calls the police. I don't know if she called the guy or one of the guys she'd been dating or the police directly. So the police show up. So we go backwards and forwards with the police. I'm cool, calm. You know, I'm in no heightened state of whatever. Obviously, I'm upset. Obviously, I'm angry. Obviously, a whole bunch of things. But I'm not acting out. I'm not, you know, that kind of volatile person. And I'm still trying to work this out for my children. I just wanted to get home and get them okay. So the cop spoke to me, and you know, everything was fine. And he went up to my ex-wife and said, you know, apparently, this is what I later found out, you know, is everything okay? You know, are you afraid? Are you this? Are you that? All the usual questions. Jill answered, no, everything's fine. You know, not a problem. It's okay. It's this. It's that. Yeah, I don't. You know, no, I don't fear anything. Da 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 da. You know, usual. So okay, fine. At the court case, she said on the stand that this is the family court trial. She said on the stand, I couldn't believe this because I had the document in front of me. She said she told the police officer she feared for her life and wanted me out of the house. So when I got my chance to cross-examine, I'd run out of money by then, so I was functioning as my own attorney at the family trial. When I got the chance to cross-examine, I, you know, went through that point, and without alluding to anything, I then asked the court to admit into evidence, and you have to do it in a prelim sense. You have to, you know, list them all out. But I didn't know if I was going to use any of it. But if she was going to not say something like that, why would I need to submit that report? It makes no sense. But the moment she said it, I've got a police report that says this officer, you know, spoke to Jillian at length and asked if and Jillian, and he put it in quotes, that she didn't fear for her life and was perfectly fine leaving, and there wasn't any problems or any issues. Totally fine. And so I submitted that as evidence. The Judge Linda Monroe, she writes in a memorandum of decision, the witness, the plaintiff, which is my ex-wife, stated that she feared for her life and wanted Bill out of the house, and expressed this in gravity to the officer, and so on and so forth, so on and so forth. After reading the police report, the court finds she never said this to the officer. If you find as a judge that what the witness said was untrue, that's perjury. And at that moment should have issued a bench warrant. And I tried on at least 4 occasions to have a bench warrant, and I was shot down every single time. I still have the court transcripts to this day showing that. So you can't make this stuff up. So the only thing that Judge Linda Monroe let me down on in terms of the trial was the perjury aspect. She actually let me put on everything that should have been my criminal trial, no doubt about it. And I am so grateful for it today because I now have all of that on record. But the prosecutors who went in the criminal transcripts, in court and obviously in the transcripts, stated that they needed more time to read the family court transcripts. Well, if you're reading the family court transcripts, how can you possibly prosecute me? There is no way you could read those transcripts and prosecute me. There is just no way, because everything came out. Absolutely everything. Everything that was used to arrest me was completely blown away by Judge Linda Monroe. That narrative, her 40-page narrative, was all in my favor. Her orders, custody, who gets what, this, that, and the other, all went to jail. And she based that on the fact that I have pending criminal charges. Now, all that needed to happen was what's called judicial notice. If the prosecutors had taken judicial notice, which I believe they did when they said they needed more time to read the transcripts, if they took judicial notice the way they should have done, there's no way they would have prosecuted me. And I believe at that point, ethical prosecutors would have then, gone to try and suck out to try and get her arrested for perjury and falsifying a police report and so on and so forth. So, when you add all these little things together, and I do want to mention one more thing about the sexual assault. She told the family court psychologist who testified on the stand that I had raped her at knife point or at scissor point. He couldn't quite remember which, but he knows there was some sort of I had some sort of weapon that I had done this with. She says on the stand, no, he didn't rape me with a knife or with a pair of scissors. No, I don't know where that came from. So the state psychologist, who has done more cases for the state of Connecticut than any other psychologist in the state, is lying, apparently. So the judge also made note of that, and that's why when I say, one of the things she wrote was, and I wish I could read it from a page, which I should have brought out, but I'm paraphrasing, but I think I'm going to get most of it right. She wrote in a memorandum of decision, she said, the criminal charges pending against the defendant is not something this court can answer without questions. Now, apparently, that is legalese, I'm told, for the judge saying my ex-wife is a liar and I'm credible. Because if you think about it, a female judge in a family trial with children involved, if I'd have raped my wife, would have thrown the book at me so hard, she would have nailed my coffin in the criminal trial. There is no way I could have ever won a criminal trial. She would have nailed me if she thought I had done it. But she realized I hadn't done it. She realized that it was a lie. But because of her own failings on the perjury issues and some other things, she made that comment, and that's how she sidestepped the issue of my guilt or innocence. But it was what she didn't do that proved that I was innocent, because she would have nailed me to the wall if she thought I was guilty. So basically what she said was, these are not things that this court can answer without question. She was basically saying, I question everything this woman says. There was one incident where I mentioned to you when the police had been called prior to the event. I was bringing that point out with Jillian because that was a part of my evidence. I was submitting the transcript from the arraignment, I believe. It was in a couple of places, but the one from the arraignment. And Jillian, I first got her to answer that I had raped her on the Wednesday night, Thursday morning. I then submitted into evidence the arraignment transcript that her attorney, who was allowed to speak at my arraignment, which is also should have not been allowed. You can't. Her divorce attorney is not supposed to speak at my arraignment. Nobody is. It's supposed to be the prosecutor and whoever was representing me, a public defender. So that was already grounds for something, and it never happened. But anyway, her attorney had sort of said, "No, Your Honor," because the judge in the arraignment said, "Well, she could have just gone. Why didn't she just move and get out the house, or one of those things?" And oh, she did, Your Honor. I was hired on the Tuesday, and I believe she called the police on the Tuesday, on the same day, Tuesday, or on the Wednesday. So I had that in the transcript. I know when she called the police. There's a record of it at the police department. So I then said to Jillian, when are you saying that I raped you? Knowing full, if in my mind, I'm sorry to digress on this a little bit, Christian, but in my mind, I was trying to catch her out on the information I knew the family court of relations lady was going to come with, because she was going to say it happened on the Thursday night, Friday morning. That's what my ex-wife Jillian had said when it happened. So that was what I was initially angling for. But then when she says this on the stand, and which completely baffled me, I know what I've got wrote on this arraignment. So I've now got what I think the terminology is a twofer. I got two for the price of one. So I put this into evidence, and there was another question that I led in with, and the judge stopped it. She stopped it cold. I was about to ask my next question, and I heard, "One moment, Mr. Coleman." And I looked up, and the way she framed it with my ex-wife was to make herself look like an idiot. She was trying to solicit something from Jillian. I didn't realize it at the time, but obviously later on I did. She looked and she said, "Just so I'm clear, you had called the police about the incident on the Tuesday and on the Wednesday," and to which Jillian said yes. "And he raped you on the Wednesday night, Thursday morning. When did this actual, or something? When did this actual rape? So I'm clear. When did this actual rape occur?" And she said, "Wednesday night, Thursday morning." So I looked down at my piece of paper, and in my body, I was doing somersaults. I was jumping for joy because I realized what had just happened. The judge realized that it was out of sync. She knew it was out of sync. And she knew instantly at that moment it was a lie. So again, she should have been arrested. And she wasn't. You can't make this stuff. And so far I've gotten through about 50% of the red flags, as you call them, that should have gone up both for the family court judge and the pre-trial judge, and also the trial judge, and also the prosecutors. And that's the piece where we're at in terms of all the bits and pieces, and there's more. And, but again, that you get the sense of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just so far. I mean, I could probably pick out myself probably about 20 to 25 red flags so far. And I'm not an experienced attorney, so moving on, your case, it started in the family court as sort of like a divorce/custody case,
Yeah.
And then when the rape was brought up, the rape allegation was brought up, it moved into criminal court, and then according to, I think it was a Daily Mail, it eventually went into the U.S. Supreme Court.
No, just to clarify, basically what happened was it originally started, as I said, as my arrest, which triggered obviously the whole divorce thing. The divorce family court trial happened prior to the criminal trial. But initially, right in the moment of my arrest, it was all in one. Her plan was get me arrested, file for divorce, get the kids. 2 years later, that was in 2002. 2 years later, there was the family court trial, and early 2005 was the criminal trial. And so everything I was doing while I was out on bond was showing my innocence and preparing for the family trial. Then once I got, well, just let me talk about the trial a little bit before I think I know where I think the Supreme Court that you speak of is actually to do with the human rights and the force feeding issue. But the trial itself, my trial, I was told on Friday afternoon, after being out for 2.5, 3 years on bond, that on a Friday afternoon by a paralegal in my lawyer's office, my trial was starting on Monday. That's called railroading, being railroaded. I knew we weren't prepared. I knew we couldn't have been ready because he'd done nothing on the case. Even though I'd had him for 2.5 years, he'd just done nothing. So we start picking a jury and those kinds of things. By the week the following Monday, we began the trial in full. They put on their case. The one piece of evidence that did come out during their piece of it, the prosecutor's side, was the fact that she said twice under oath in the criminal trial she wasn't allowed to go to work that day. We produced, not me, but the new attorney that had gotten, but it's actually my attorney's now boss, new boss, and the private investigator took it upon themselves to go and get the timesheet. That was submitted into evidence, and it was shown to the jury, and the jury, apparently there was also almost a mistrial because the jury were overheard to talk about it outside of their room, and one juror said to the other juror, how could she say she wasn't allowed to go to work, and there's her time card saying she was in work? Now, that is a great question in the jury room. You say that out of the jury room, it's reason for a new trial. Eventually, we had that hearing for a new trial based on jury misconduct and so on and so forth, and it was overruled, and the verdict stood, which is, again, unconscionable. But that's what Waterbury is. So it was a one-day trial, and for my $25,000, $30,000, whatever it was we gave him, probably more, he basically stood out of his seat when it was my turn to put on my case with the family court relations lady sitting outside. He stood up and said, defense rests. Sat down. That was it. He'd convinced me they haven't proven their case. We're not going to put on a case. That is the biggest sellout of all time. And that's 100% why I got convicted. And that was my day in court. It lasted one day. The real interesting piece, it took close to 2 weeks for the jury to come back with a verdict. They did not come back with a verdict till a week the following Thursday. A week the following Thursday. I had to wait almost 2 weeks for a verdict of guilty. You cannot make, talk about pain. And then when they announced that I was guilty and I basically had lost it in the courtroom, I could see one lady juror just in complete anguish, just knew she had made a holocaust of a mistake. It hit her. She knew. But there I was. From there on in, it was all over. There are no appeals. I want to make it clear to your audience that the myth of appeals is exactly that, a myth. Appeals, when you hear, whether it's lawyers or, there's a high bar to be convicted, that's a myth. When you hear things like, well, you have your appeals, it always insinuates that you're going to have a retrial at your appeal stage. An appeal is an error of law. If there are no errors of law, you cannot prevail on an appeal. The United States Supreme Court have even said in more than one case that the proof of actual innocence is not a vehicle to overturn a verdict. Period. It has to be an error of law, whether it was on behalf of the prosecutor, behalf of the judge, granting something or sustaining something or denying something, whatever the case may be. Something has to be an error of law. That's what an appeal is. Unfortunately, then we see cases like Amanda Knox in Italy, who do have a system where the appeals are retrying the case. And that is and it's only when they get to their Supreme Court does it become an error of law. In all appeals prior to that point, it is retrying the case. In the United States, it is absolutely not that. There is not a hype in sexual assault cases, in home invasion cases, in domestic violence situations, and I'll have a little mention about that in a moment. There is no high bar. It's a very, very low bar. You've got every juror who comes into a courtroom who've watched CSI, who believe every case has gone through CSI. The show CSI, for those who don't know what that is, and they think, oh, they wouldn't bring him to a trial if he wasn't guilty. And I've even heard a juror on television say, well, we found one time there was a case on television where somebody was found not guilty. They're always guilty. All those shows, Dateline, you name the show, every case, everybody's always found guilty. But on the one occasion that somebody walked out, one juror said, the prosecutor didn't give us the evidence to do our job. I couldn't believe what I heard. They believe their job, when they go in as a juror, is to convict. Because you're sitting there, you wouldn't be there if the prosecutors didn't think you were guilty. So we've got to convict you, we just need that information. That's their job, to convict you. You cannot change that. It's a flawed system that has got to go. There's science available now that can, dictate every case for truth and honesty. There's no question about it, and they won't do that because it puts too many people out of a job, like lawyers. They can analyze your brain, they can scan your brain. They've got all of those things now, and unfortunately, it's not allowed in a court of law as yet. So anyway, that was the piece about my trial. To answer your question, Christian, if you want me to continue, I waited 2 years before I went on a hunger strike because I felt I was actually, my family is in some way to blame for this, and my friends. They wanted me to hold on, and I felt initially, because of that, I did, because of the jury misconduct, which was a few months later. Then it was closer to when the direct appeal. My direct appeal lawyers were excellent, two ladies out of a firm in Hartford, one who's now a judge, were just very caring, came out to see me on Sundays, and unprecedented. You don't normally see an appeals attorney. You never get a visit from them. But I was seeing these two people almost every week. And so I did. I held on, and eventually it came back. And the day it came back, your appeal has been denied, was the day I started my hunger strike. And from that moment on, it was a completely different path, and that was 2007. To just miss out that middle bit momentarily, getting to the end, my case is now used throughout the United States as Lance versus Coleman, who was the commissioner at the time, state of Connecticut DOC, versus Coleman. And it's used as a landmark case throughout the United States for feeding hunger striking inmates. I don't know to what extent it's been used. I think it's been used several times. But basically, as a sister state, it's now until there's a United States Supreme Court case overturning it, it is now the law of the land, basically. And anytime they need to force feed someone, that's the case they now use. And so that's where the Connecticut Supreme Court comes in. And unfortunately, I couldn't afford to take it, or had nobody to take it to the United States Supreme Court. And sadly, even though I petitioned myself, it was denied, and they very rarely. You only take 1% of cases that's requested of them anyway, but it's like 0.001% where the actual case is being represented by the prisoner. Normally, you would need an attorney, and obviously, I didn't have one. So it was denied, say it, at the United Supreme Court level, and at that point, it was ended. So it's the Lord of the land, basically. So again, Christian, I'm not sure how much you want to know, or you think your listeners would want to know, and about my human rights piece. But you can feel free to ask me about that if you would like.
Well, I was actually gonna say, so at this point in the story, despite the lack of evidence, despite the perjury, despite the lies happened to court, you're still convicted. Now you're in prison. So where does the human rights portion come into play? How did the hunger strike start, first of all, and what were your experiences in prison as somebody who was falsely convicted of rape?
Wow. Make a note of that last question, and if I forget to answer it, please remind me of it. Basically, because that's an interesting and important point. Basically, it started, as I say, when I got the final notice that my direct appeal had failed. And I began my hunger strike not thinking anything to do with being force-fed. To my knowledge and my understanding at that time, that the whole of the Western world wouldn't force-feed anybody, because being from England during the time of what's known locally here as the Troubles, which was the conflict between the British government and Irish Catholics in Northern Ireland, there were a great many hunger strikes. And eventually the World Court of Human Rights and Civil Liberties had banned the use of force feeding as inhumane. And England, being, I believe, for all of its faults, and our government, particularly at the moment, and so on and so forth, has many faults. But we also get a lot of things right, and we do circumvent to World Courts of Human Rights and Civil Liberties, as we do to all the world authorities. The United States does not. I think it may acquiesce with there's one, I think is it the World Bank maybe, there's one world organization where it just doesn't have a choice, I think. But other than that, the United States laws are always ahead of any international laws. So in other words, anybody who's, if there was a war crime person here, like we were talking about Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush as being possible people involved in war crimes, they could never be extradited to The Hague for prosecution, because the United States does not extradite. It does not recognize any law above itself. But here in England we do. So when I started my hunger strike, I had no clue about being force-fed. I thought I was going to be left alone to die. I was going to ask, I'm not a hero, I would have asked for pain management. My limited knowledge at the time, I knew morphine was something that helped, but I had no real clue. There was no book for this. I didn't have I didn't go to the library and get a book on how to do a hunger strike. I knew about Gandhi. I knew about, I think Bobby Sands. I knew about, a couple of things vaguely as in general knowledge, but I had no blueprint. So the next thing I know, I've been put in a hospital in Connecticut, prison hospital. It's actually a full-blown maximum security prison, and there's a hospital in it. And Marshall came up to me and said, Mr. Coleman, I said, yes. Said, you're being sued. I said, being sued? I'm at the top of my head, I'm thinking, what now? I mean, A, I have nothing, so who could be suing me? I just had no clue. It's a lawsuit to force feed me. That's what it was. So I get served with it in a prison hospital. And from that moment on, now I've got to find a way of defending myself. At the very last second, I was able to get a paid attorney doing something for free because he'd been recommended by somebody else, and he did the best that he could with basically 30 hours notice to do what he could in what was called like a temporary injunction. So they got the temporary injunction, and the case was scheduled for a trial. Thankfully, I was able to get then the representation in the background, at least, but certainly as a client. I became a client of the ACLU in Connecticut. And I don't believe I'm out of line by saying this, but it was the attorney there, Attorney David McGuire, who I would, at this point, and you don't often say this about, in fact, you don't say this about lawyers, but in David's case, I pretty much consider him now a pseudo brother. He is just one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my life. I would be not having this conversation with you if it wasn't for David McGuire. I owe so much to my family. I owe so much to my friends. I could list them all. But there's no question I would be dead without David McGuire. They would have killed me, or I would be dead of some sort of self-inflicted, you know, I would have gone crazy. There's no way I could have functioned without this guy. To this day. So they took the case on, and we were then able through, there's a worldwide organization, and the name's escaping me right now, that deal with attorneys around the world for represent. So it's not just a British company. If you're an American in Nigeria, or you're a Kenyan in Finland, or whatever, you need an attorney. They are a worldwide organization to help you with that. Somehow we reached out to this organization, and they came up with this company who had an office in London, but also had offices all over the United States. Huge law firm. And at the time, it was, although I believe they split up now, it's no longer this name, but it's Edwards, Angell, Palmer, and Dodge. And they came on as lead attorneys, and we put on a criminal, I apologize, a human rights trial maybe a year later, and unfortunately the judge sided with the state of Connecticut and allowed them to continue to force feed me. Unfortunately, the judge had made it clear he wasn't going to micromanage how it was going to happen per se, but he did enforce the fact that they could no longer restrain me unless I refused to have to be force-fed. And the reason that came about is because he had testimony that I had been completely compliant. I wasn't resisting in any way being force-fed. I was making a political statement at the start. I basically said, my 2 children need to be saved. I'm innocent, and this happens to other parents and children and innocent people in divorce and innocent people. That's all I said. I asked that you not participate in this. And that's whoever was involved. Guards, upper level prison officials, medical staff. Please do not do this. That was my little statement at the start. That's it. Then they did whatever they wanted. And I was being restrained for 16 hours a day. I was kept in suicide cells naked, because the only way that they could do what they did to me was by making me a mental health level 5, which I obviously wasn't. But they had to do that to restrain me. Otherwise, you can't restrain somebody who's not a mental health level 5. And they would keep me naked in this like Ferguson gown thing. for weeks and months at a time. I wasn't allowed showers. I wasn't allowed religious materials, legal work, and legal visits, and legal phone calls. Under pressure, I started receiving some of those things. I got a box of legal work at one point on different occasions, or I would, when I was allowed to see lawyers or phone calls with lawyers, but there were times where they were stopped, interrupted, and whether it was to force feed me or for whatever else. There were not so many violations, but I was under strict no human contact. One nurse even walked in there because none of the nurses would talk to me. And one nurse even indicated by moving her hand across her mouth like a zip to say she wasn't allowed to say anything. 2 guards, 1 nurse, that was my only human contact while they took some vitals from me. So, their objective was to break me from my protest. That was their goal. How do we break him from my protest? And it was to do these kinds of things to me. One nurse, I believe, either got fired or moved to some horrible job, or I think she got fired though, because she couldn't take the fact that I hadn't been given a shower, and she started swearing and getting angry and told, I think one of the lieutenants, that she's giving me a shower because she just didn't want to be a party. I saw captains take cameras, throw it down on the bed, bouncing them off the wall, saying that they didn't sign up, and I don't like to swear, but I didn't sign up for this shit. Why are we restraining this guy? You take as long as you want, because they have to give me range of motion every 2 hours. They just wanted no part of it. So, I endured for on and off for 7 years. I wasn't the whole 7 years, but on and off. I endured a huge amount of human rights violations. There's no question.
Did you sustain any injury due to this?
Well, I was completely compliant, and so I think the only injuries were internal. At one point they decided that when they were only going to force feed me once a week, and I would get 350 calories from an Ensure, and then was it 2 Ensures, maybe once every 2 weeks. I don't, there's all documentation of this, but I lost 30 pounds being force fed by the Connecticut DOC. So, it's like, what they wanted to do, as one of the doctors said, who has since retired, my job is only to keep you alive. I mean, it's just unconscionable. And that wasn't even the lead doctor. The lead doctor, the psych doctor, she was the driving force of wanting to break me from the protest, and by whatever means necessary. I was peaceful the whole time, but if they were going by the letter of the court order, it was to sustain my health at the level that you're accustomed to. So if you're going to need to put a tube in my nose and give me 1,500 calories a day, then that's what you should have done by the court order. You are authorized to do it. And they didn't do it. What they wanted to do was play around with it. And that's what they did. There were times when I would take my own fluids and nutrition, not in terms of food, but fluids. When there were times that I had to do something legally, like I had a clemency process that I had to do. I went for clemency. I had nobody to represent me. I couldn't do it from being comatose on a bed. The only way it was going to get done is if I did it. So I did it, and so I took some of my own fluids, and that kept me going. But once that process ended, then I was done again. And each time they would abuse me in the same way. The only thing they couldn't do was restrain me anymore. But the way they got around that was they gave me these bogus disciplinary tickets for absolutely nothing. And they think, and sadly, some of the people who gave me those tickets think that's going to go away. I hope one day that's going to come back and bite them in the backside. Because getting a disciplinary ticket in a prison is very, very consequential. It's not good, and you get deprived everything. So whether they did it because they were flexing themselves on the temporary injunction and just did whatever they wanted, or after on the permanent injunction started using tickets, it amounted to the same thing. What they did to me, except for the only thing that really changed was they no longer could restrain me, and that pissed them off. They were pissed about that. The real higher ups, they were really pissed about that. But internally, it was where I did the physical damage.
So, like, when they were restraining you, were they ever, like, excessive in their force, despite the fact that you were not resisting?
No. I think for the most part at that point, I'd already received quite a considerable amount of press coverage, media coverage, television coverage. I was on television at one point almost every day. There was a very famous case involving a Kennedy relative, and I was getting more airtime than he was, and he was in the same facility. So I think, to the most part, the guards understood something, and at best wanted just to have no part of it. And some of them knew enough to say, maybe there's something going on here, and so on. I only really came across, I could count on one hand the amount of mistreatment that I've had at the hands of guards, and nothing rose to the level of actual physical violence, because I wasn't doing anything physically violent, but it was malicious in what they did to me. It's called in prison getting you jammed up. So they will jam you up. And that's basically, and I know who those officers are. And, I have a report, and I kept logbooks and exactly what they did, exactly what they said, and so on and so forth. I never seek revenge. I think it was Shakespeare who said, seek revenge, dig two graves. I am not on any revengeful path, but I do believe in accountability, and you need to stay on a very straight track. And it's on. This is on every subject for me. I have a very long train track. There is no destination. It's just a path, and each one of those wooden slots across the rails that you come across is another day that I just have to. I can't get sidetracked with the sidings that come along. Whether it's family who try and sidetrack me because they love me so much, and friends, or whether it's some horrible situation that gets thrown at me. I've become very good at just staying on this train track without a goal. And I know what it's like to be goal orientated. I've been a coach, a professional and college coach. So, and in different walks of life, it's very appropriate. It is not appropriate when you're dealing with something like this, anything in your personal life, because you're just going to go crazy. You'll kill someone, or you kill yourself. And so I just stay on this track, and and try and get through it. And maybe that's a point I should a shade expand on. The biggest impact all of this has had on me, whether it's I've been diagnosed with PTSD 3 times now. Obviously, the turmoil of what's happened in my life, all the losses, all the grief and losses, but also due to the fact of how I was treated in prison with regards to the hunger strike. And there's weeks and months that I just don't remember. I have no recollection. I just have no. I can't remember these endless days. I don't know what I did. I wasn't always on the bed. There was times when I couldn't, even in sitting in a wheelchair, which I spent a lot of time in on some occasions, I was down to 100 and, what was it, about 108 pounds, I think, at one point. I couldn't lift my head off my shoulder. The biggest impact is definitely mental health. I'm on course for being in trauma therapy for two sets, one to do with the torture and one to do with all the losses and all the things in my life, my children. And that is by far and away the biggest impact. There are times I have to take short journeys on a train to go somewhere, and you know, I have attacks and I don't even know what they are. You know, I can't be alone. I can't be with people. I can't be in small spaces, and I can't be in open spaces. You know, and some people may remember that's almost like a scene from Fawlty Towers with John Cleese. You know, and but it's how I feel, and I can't even. Sometimes I can't even go to family functions. I've declined more than I've been to. You know, it's very difficult for me to do anything, and you know, I can't compare myself to somebody who's been through like Vietnam or World War II, or you know, as a soldier. But if what I'm experiencing is anything to go by, I can't even imagine their PTSD. It's completely, I can't even describe it. I really can't. But you know, I rely on the fact I don't try and answer all the questions all the time. That was one piece of good advice I got from a therapist in Connecticut. And when my children had been abducted, and I stay on this track without a destination. And so I would say that mental health has been my biggest impact so far. Even though, by the way, medically, I had some really serious stuff going on there for a while. And my sister found me on the floor, passed out. The medics had said that I was basically had a near-death experience. My blood pressure was under 70 over 30. The doctors at the hospital said that you were on your way out. And to this day, we don't know why that happened. I've had 3 episodes like that, and I've been lucky in each case. 2 of them happened in prison. And when I say I was lucky there, because medical staff were always on scene because I was in the hospital. And on one other occasion, it was when my sister was coming for a visit, luckily enough, and I was on the bathroom floor. And they ended up putting me upside down, having my legs in the air, and you know, the medical people when they arrived in the ambulance and so on. So I've had some very serious medical issues. I'm still in physiotherapy for you know, lack of mobility in certain parts of my body, and I go to physiotherapy all the time. So, but mental health is the biggest issue.
Okay, and so now you're obviously you're out of prison now. How long was your prison sentence, and when were you actually deported? I know you were kind of kicked out of the United States.
Yeah, that's a great point. Something that should be brought up too. I could have left on an immigration statute, probably within weeks or months of my conviction, and I knew that, and I chose not to. Then I could have left at any time with that throughout. But then I could have left after 6 years, I think it was, with the good time. They'd reinstated the good time, and I'd earned enough to be gone after 6 years. My actual sentence to serve was 8, as in its completion, but it was 15 years that I got sentenced to. And then, because I wouldn't sign the registry in the United States, I was rearrested, and I spent 2 additional years in prison awaiting trial for not signing the registry. So I was already up to 10 And the only way that, and I made this statement to several people, the ACLU attorney, my family, certain other people, the only way they could get rid of me was illegally deport me. To this day, they're going to say they legally did it, but they absolutely did not. You cannot be deported while you have ongoing legal cases in the United States as a prisoner. You could argue the toss about a habeas, which is a habeas corpus, whether that counts. You can argue the case on a few, but I had federal court cases pending, and I had a criminal case. So you can't deport me. So apparently what they did, I was scheduled for a hearing on my ongoing criminal case on that Wednesday morning. They brought it forward to the Tuesday morning, unbeknown to me. I was picked up at 11 o'clock. They had a court session about me at, I believe, 10 a.m. and the judge dismissed the case at 10 a.m. the day before my court hearing was scheduled for. So basically what they did was, and this is where there's been some other collusion, basically what they did was they had to get rid of the criminal case and hang their hat on. That was the thing that now they can deport me on because my direct appeal had ended. But I had the lawsuit that I'm still involved with to this day in regards to my human rights and civil liberties. That's an ongoing lawsuit of which there's an attorney for, a paid attorney. And I also have a human rights organization who have me as a client who are going to be involved in that case. So it's an ongoing federal case. And I also had cases besides the criminal case. I had a habeas case in the state of Connecticut in the state courts. You can't deport me. I had literally 4 or 5 cases still open, but they went ahead and deported me. So I spent, some could argue I spent 10 years longer than I had to. Some may argue, well, 4 years. Some would argue 2. But I certainly had gone past my end of sentence date by 2 years. And I was committed to my hunger strike. I was committed to dying. If I go to prison here in the UK, I would die in prison because here they don't force feed you. But in the United States they do. So I was prepared to die, and I still am. I'm not suicidal. I don't want to die. I'd like to live. Maybe I've got a few decades left in front of me. Who knows? Nobody knew what was going to happen to the concentration camp Jews in the 40s. Some of them died on the spot the moment they were given food. Some of them lived till they were 90 years old. I mean, nobody knows. It's down to the individual how this is going to affect my health. Right now my body retains everything. So I know that's an issue. I don't know what's going on there, but we'll hopefully get to it. But anyway, no, I could have gone home a lot sooner. If I was guilty, I'd have been home within weeks. I would have just filed for the immigration statute and gone. But I was innocent, and I was going to fight that.
Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on now in Britain? As far as I know, you're still kind of required to sign the sexual registry in the UK.
Right.
But
that is still pretty. Yeah, that's a great question. That's still pretty much a gray area. It is for me. I'm sure the police here are doing what they need to do. I've done what I've needed to do. And I don't want to say too much more on that subject because it's ongoing. But what I would say is that every single time there's a knock on the door, I feel it's my time to go to prison. There's not a day goes by. There's not a buzzer that doesn't happen. There's not a something that's slightly off that doesn't alert me to the fact, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. You know, obviously I was picked up from Heathrow by Scotland Yard, and I went straight to a courthouse. I was in a wheelchair, pretty much, and you know, I was told what I had to do and that kind of thing. I've been visited by the Liverpool police, and that's an ongoing fluid situation. And I think they realize they've inherited me. I don't want to speak for them. They have to do their job per the law. But my sense is they feel that something really, really bad and wrong happened to me. I think they've done some of their homework. I think they have to, obviously. And you know, so, you know, what that translates into, I don't know, but I know they will do their job, and that's what they're going to do. You know, they get paychecks and they put food on their table, and that's what they'll do, and they're not going to risk that for the likes of me. However, you know, I live with that hanging over my head every single moment of every single day, and I obviously would like that to change, and so far it hasn't. So, you know, I pray that one day it will, and unfortunately, it lies with clearing my name in the United States. That's where that's going to change. It won't change any other way.
And is that something that you're still continuing to fight?
Yeah, like
are you still trying to clear your name in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think, you know, you're only one person. There's one thing at a time, and you know, as I said earlier, that's you know, something that will be with me for as long as I draw breath. I'm creating a whole package of things that if anybody ever looks into it after I'm dead would prove I'm innocent. You know, so I'm not going to hopefully leave this earth without putting together a very concise blueprint of, you know, my innocence. But you know, sometimes you've got to put a few things on the back burner. So yes, that is something that will be with me for my life. And but you know, right now I've got a lawsuit, an active lawsuit in the United States to do with my human rights and civil liberties. That's where, you know, my focus has got to be. I've become an activist. I just want to say on the record for your listeners as well, I'm vehemently opposed to any form of neo-Nazi organizations. I don't care if that involves women in the feminist movement or whatever it may be. I am against that, and I always have been, and I will actively work against that kind of thing, because I believe that is the root cause of why some of the laws are the way they are, the way they've been interpreted in some situations, is because of that particular root of the toothache, so to speak. So I'm an activist in that thing, but I also want to say that I'm obviously in no way against any women or in any way, shape, way, or form. Most of my supporters are female. I have a couple of feminist friends, but they are logical people, not nuts. You know, you know, most of my family are women, and you know, so it's not, I will not go on a path of hate, and I won't go on a path of revenge. You know, those are cancers that will just kill you. So what I try and focus on is the non-violent way. It's slower, and it can be very painful, but it's really the only way to go, and you just have to have the patience to keep going. You need a support system, whether that's family, friends, or a therapist, or all the above. But yeah, that, you know, it's important for me to get out there that, you know, you can be against something, but you know, to be against somebody because of a gender or a race or a religion is just completely unethical, immoral, and that's just not going to be productive for you.
I guess, you know, I really have just two more questions. First, how long has it been since you've seen your children? It's
I've done very well, and in thoughts of not thinking about my kids. Somebody once gave me the analogy that it's amazing how it kind of goes back to World War II all the time, but there's so many lessons to learn from that. But they're called World War II brides. You ask a 99-year-old woman about her husband, fiance, or boyfriend who went to war, and she only has the image of this basically child man at 18, with his rifle going to war. And that's the only image I have of my children. I last saw them when they were 8 and 6 years old. And I went from a parent who changed every diaper, had every bath with them, dressed them every morning, noon, and night, cooked for them morning, noon, and night. I was the only one who could cook. I was their coach. I was identified as their emotional and nurturing parent. To go from that to nothing, I can't even begin to put into words. And those are part of the losses that I have. And so they are now, going on 17, 19. I'm assuming. So it's been a long time, and I don't even try and think about it. I really don't want to think about how old they are. I don't want to think. It's like I'm doing this because I have children, but I can only survive by saying I don't have children. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody out there, but it's my motivation, but it's also my Achilles heel. And I've got to make sure that, I can't let it debilitate me. I've had so many other losses, my life, my career, possessions, personal belongings, photographs of me with my father as a child. I will never get them back. My mother died while I was in prison, and my family, because they knew it was the right thing to do, but for me, I didn't know for 2 years. And I would get Christmas cards from my mother who'd been dead for 2 years. I lost my sister while I was out in Bonn, my eldest sister. I can't begin to tell you how devastating that was. There's just, these are the things that, somebody who has this happen to them, goes through. And it just doesn't happen to, that person. It happens to everybody who cares about that person, their family, their friends, they all go through it. And for a system to willfully, help somebody in this kind of, behavior, they just got to be held accountable. And I have I've heard of so many cases like mine with the family, or like mine with a criminal, sometimes a little bit of both of that. But nobody seems to have heard of a case like mine where we've got the whole smorgasbord, the gamut. And I am now at the point where I just don't care who knows what, where, when, and how. I want to be, a part of the solution that changes these things. And I don't know how I'm doing it or how I will do it. I just know I will do it. And you can't do it alone. And but I have so many losses. But if I stop and focus on my kids, because of the memory that I have of how old they are when I last saw them, yeah.
Well, I mean, we all have different coping mechanisms, and if there's really nothing wrong with it if it gives you the strength to carry on and keep going. There's nothing really wrong with sort of putting that in the back of your mind for the time being. But leading into my last question, if you could speak to your children, if your children were to see this, what do you want to say to them? What do you want them to know? And just what do you want to say to them?
In a way, Christian, I would respectfully decline to answer that question, but I will phrase it this way. I cannot be a part of them realizing what the truth is. I cannot even be a seed in that regard. I cannot, whether it's through a third party or, a message or something, I cannot be a part of that, because they need to take their own journey. Now, I pray they take a journey where they find something, they see something, they investigate something, and they eventually come to the conclusion of what their mother did, and the truth of what this whole situation is. And at that moment, I can embrace them, I can take them, because they've done it. They've walked through the door. But the moment I, even as much as a little seed, help in that process, I have become the parent that she was. And effectively, they could lose two parents. So I don't want any part of that. I don't want to, reach out to them. I can't reach out to them. It's not morally or ethically correct. It's just the wrong thing to do, no matter how old they are. They need to go on their own journey, and it's the lesson. It's the lesson of the evils. I mean, the risk of them losing both parents is just unconscionable to me. Somebody once said, well, how could you leave them with an abuser like your ex-wife? I mean, the family court relations lady believed she had some sort of borderline personality disorder, and so there's little or no empathy for somebody else. I can't be a party to that journey. It's just not the right thing to do. But should they walk through the door knowing the truth, then that's a different kettle of fish. That is then something I dream about. I can't imagine being on anything other than my knees, frankly.
So just to clarify, you're saying that you don't want to do anything that could potentially alienate the mother in the same way that she might be potentially alienating you.
I think the first part of what you just said is accurate. I think the second part is she did alienate me. I mean, that's exactly what this is. You're right. I don't want to be involved in any way in alienating her. That is something that they need to figure out for themselves, and maybe it's just luck. Maybe something happens. Maybe I have no clue. I can't even begin to guess, and I can't even think about that as being a possibility. Again, nobody knows. You could be the most peaceful person in the world. Nobody knows what their snapping points are. I don't want to snap and jump off a balcony or put a piece of rope around my neck or stick a gun to my head. And I certainly don't want to get an AK-47 and start shooting people, whether they are the actual people who are guilty of what they've done to me or randomly. These are the things that set you on a path to very bad things. So you've got to figure out, and I've had to figure out, how not to go along into those dark places, on those dark paths. And for me, it's not even contemplating that my children will ever know the truth. Not ever. That is just going to be a reality. My focus needs to be for the future, to hold people accountable so that, you know, it doesn't happen to anybody else ever again. This is a very money orientated world. There are many things that are going on. You can't get too caught up in conspiracies, even though, or being a conspiracy theorist, even though they exist. You can't get caught up in that stuff, because that will drive you nuts. You know, it's just what it is. You know, and you know, each day you've got to find a way of now staying on the track, staying on the train track, and staying with those thoughts that are going to get and get the help that you need. In my case, it's family and friends, but it's also, you know, a couple of strong therapists. I can't do this alone. I can't stay in this track by myself. So, you know, I can't be a party to anything that they do in regards to finding the truth. I just can't. And I just pray that one day that happens, but I can't think of it as even being a possibility. That's just, and to finish that, the result of that is I have to go through the pain. I have to go through the pain of all these losses, of all these things, because that is actually normal to feel the kinds of pain that I'm feeling, and as anybody would. Any of these things are, your only other option of not feeling this pain is you're a narcissistic sociopath, and that means you'll maybe picking up that AK-47. So that's a whole different psychosis. So the psychosis that I got, you know, is situational, and it's painful, and it's extremely painful, but it tells me I'm human, and it tells me, you know, that I'm alive, and it tells me, you know, and it can be my motivation, if you like. My anger is my motivation. I'm extremely angry, and I'm angry at a great deal of people, but it's the way you act out on that anger. So I've just got to find it as a fuel and use it as a fuel and use it productively, which I hope, I don't know, that's for others to say, that's what I am doing. I just don't know.
Well, I think on that note, I think this would be a good place to sort of wrap it up. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Right.
I want to thank the audience for joining us today and listening to Bill's story. Is there
may I thank some people, Christian? I'd like to thank your organization, all the listeners, or people who are watching, whatever. You know, just thank you. Please be strong. Stay in there. Do what you've got to do. You're not alone. Nobody's alone. You know, just keep reaching out. And, you know, thank you to everybody for giving me this opportunity to being in front of you all. I'm so very grateful. And I can't even begin to put that into words. So thank everybody involved for allowing me this time. Thank you so very, very much.
Well, you are welcome. I guess we'll wrap it up there. I don't really have anything prepared, so.
Thanks again, Christian.
This is Christian from AVFM Media or AVFM Radio signing out.
Good night. Thank you.